Oh yeah, yeah. I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna be there. Hell, I might even try to watch it in person, but I'm definitely gonna be there. What's going on, everybody? I am back with a new episode of the Conscious Approach podcast. Once again, here for another one. My name is JV Wins, and I thought we'd talk a little sports talk. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm a big boxing fan. I'm a sports fan in general, but I'm a big boxing fan. I grew up watching boxing with my dad. He got me into it. We used to watch all the big time pay-per-view fights back in the 90s and the early 2000s when the sport was kind of at a higher peak, certainly, than it is now. And I remain a boxing fan to this day, but the sport has become marginalized. But what we see with the clip that came on the beginning of this video, we have another one of these exhibition fights coming up on June 6th in my hometown of Miami, Florida at Hard Rock Stadium. Floyd Money Mayweather will be fighting one of those Paul boys, Logan Paul. That fight will take place on Saturday, June 6th in Hard Rock Stadium. And I'm looking forward to it, man. Floyd is doing his thing, prompting it up, making sure that it's a fight that everybody's going to want to see, and furthermore, making sure that it's going to maximize its opportunities to get as many people to pay that $100 pay-per-view fee, which, you believe it or not, a lot of people are going to pay that $100 pay-per-view fee for that fight, despite the fact that it's an exhibition fight. But moreover, going back to the fight between Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor, and then, some of these fights that have happened recently where I believe it was Jake Paul fought, was it one of those Paul boys knocked out a basketball player, Nate Robinson. And these exhibition fights are becoming more and more the rage. We've even had some exhibition fights between boxers who have retired. Mike Tyson recently got into the ring with Roy Jones Jr. for an exhibition fight to raise money for charity. So a lot of the exhibitionism taking place in boxing, particularly between fighters who haven't been, particularly with fights that are involving fighters who haven't been traditionally groomed to sort of go through the rigors of fighting the way that a traditional professional boxer has, it's raising a lot of questions within the culture of boxing as to whether exhibitionism is a good thing for boxing. You go into various circles where people are having conversations about this, and there's a debate as to whether exhibitionism is diluting the purity of boxing. It's sort of watering it down and turning it into a sideshow. You have people on one side who think that it's good for the sport because of the attention that it garners, and you have the purists, the boxing faithful, the people who care about the sport retaining its sanctity, who believe that it's bad for boxing. They believe that exhibitionism is turning boxing into a circus, into a sideshow. Now, in my opinion, if you ask me whether exhibitionism is good for boxing, not only do I think exhibitionism is great for boxing, but I also think that if you have a problem with exhibitionism, then you need to turn to boxing to blame for why exhibitionism has become so popular with respect to boxing these days. This is a problem that boxing created, and boxing, and only boxing, has itself to blame. Now, first and foremost, exhibitionism is great for boxing because of the fact that boxing has become marginalized. Any attention that the sport can garner from casual sports fans is a win for the sport. The more people that you have who are willing to spend $100 on a pay-per-view fee to be able to watch that fight, I don't know how you can argue that this is not a win for the sport. These sports don't exist if they aren't financially supported by the customer base. So as pure as you want boxing to remain, if it has no customer base to support it through its hard-earned dollars, it will at some point cease to exist. So if you want to stick around, you need to hope that the sport continues to raise money from the paying customer. And exhibitionism is something that we have seen helps, it piques the interest of the paying customer, of the buying customer, of the casual fan. Casual sports fans who aren't necessarily interested in the next Burchelt or Berlanga fight, but might be interested in watching a fight between Logan Paul and Floyd Mayweather, or Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor, they're going to drop $100 on a pay-per-view to watch that fight. That helps the sport, period. So if you don't like it, it brings me to my next point. Boxing has itself to blame for why exhibitionism is all the rage within the sport. And, it has itself to blame for why boxing has become marginalized. And the reason why is because we don't get the fights that we want. And when we do get them, they happen far too late, well after they were supposed to happen. See Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao, which happened in 2015, but should have happened in 2009. Okay, that fight was 6 years too late. And the reason why is because Floyd Mayweather, as strategic as he is, didn't want to take the risk of having a blemished record by putting himself at risk of losing that fight. And so he denied and he pivoted until Manny Pacquiao got a little longer in the tooth. And then the promoters were able to come together and make the fight happen about 5 or 6 years too late. Now, this is a trend in boxing that is disturbing, and it sucks, and it's become all too normal. Boxing has a serious problem with not being able to give the fans the fights that they want to see, these mega fights, when they are supposed to happen. We don't care about seeing these fights 5 or 6 years after they were supposed to take place. Give us the fights now. And that's boxing's biggest problem. But it's a problem that boxing created, and it created it in part because of something that happened with the media. See, the media, the same poison that has infected boxing is the poison that infected the NBA after Michael Jordan retired. After Michael Jordan retired, something happened in the NBA with respect to the media and, media punditry and, newspaper columnists, and now all of these debate shows on television, whether it's Sports Take or First Things First or Undisputed, a lot of these different shows where they just opine on sports issues. The media created this environment for the NBA in which, as an NBA player, you were a bum if you didn't win a whole bunch of championships. I call this the Michael Jordan after effect. See, this was not in place before Jordan. Once Jordan retired with his 6 for 6 and his 6 championships, the leisure of a great player, where that great player exists with respect to other great players, it immediately became measured based upon how many championships that player has. It's the reason why Charles Barkley is a bum, because he didn't win a championship. But Bill Russell is somehow one of the top 5 greatest players ever because he won like 13 championships in a non-competitive league, rife with players who didn't really have nearly a fraction of the ability that the players of today has. It's ridiculous, but we count rings now. This is a poison that has infected the NBA. Players started to notice this. Players started to realize that, wait, as good as I am, I might be at the top of my game physically, and I put up fantastic numbers, and I might win MVPs and things like that, but the media is going to put forth that I'm a bum because I didn't win 8,000 championships. Well, if that's the case, I might as well engineer situations in which I can put myself in best position to win championships. This is what started happening in the NBA. This is what yielded LeBron going to Miami with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. This is what yielded Kevin Durant going to Golden State to play with, Draymond Green and Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. And that squad that was completely unbeatable. There was a large part of Kevin Durant's decision to do that. I firmly believe, I obviously don't know Kevin Durant personally, but Kevin Durant made that decision because he knew I could win all of the MVPs and scoring titles and all of these other accolades, all-star game appearances, all-star game MVPs. I can be a philanthropist. I can do all of this stuff. But at the end of the day, if I don't have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 championships, these ring chasers on television are going to tell me that I'm not as good as this guy, who I am clearly better than, simply because this guy won more championships than me. It's a poison that has infected the NBA, and it's a problem. That's why there are super teams today. It's because of you media people who want to ring count these guys instead of fairly evaluating where they stand as all-time great players based upon a litany of qualifiers, such as how many championships did they win, but also their ability and their individual accolades. But that would be too lazy. But that would be, too right, right? And if it's, it can't possibly be too right. If it's too right, then it's too wrong. But a similar type dynamic is taking place in boxing. And, yeah, the same way that I attribute this dynamic to Michael Jordan in the NBA, I also attribute a similar dynamic to the aforementioned Floyd Mayweather Jr. But this isn't Floyd's fault, just like what happened with Jordan and the after effect with the Jordan thing wasn't Jordan's fault. But Floyd Mayweather, regardless of where you think Floyd Mayweather exists within the pantheon of all-time great boxers, pound for pound, whether you think he's top 5 or top 10 or whatever, boxing is a little impossible, in my opinion, to sort of evaluate, where fighters lie, because there are just so many ancillary variables that go into how you would go about evaluating a boxer's all-time greatness. I mean, there's weight divisions, you got weight classes, you got different belts, you got when they fought the opponent, you got the win-loss record. It's just so much that goes into it that I always disqualify myself from any conversation talking about which fighter is better than this fighter. It seems like an exercise in futility. But Floyd Mayweather had an effect on boxing upon his, slow exit from the sport that has lingered to this day. And it's affected a lot of the prominent fighters in the sport. Floyd Mayweather retired with a perfect record. And furthermore, in the fights in which he performed, he damn near is unblemished in the fights. The man never got hit. Upon Floyd leaving the sport to sort of graduate himself to promoter status, and not being an active fighter anymore, his effect has lingered in the sport. Now all of these fighters are so concerned with their win-loss record. They're so petrified of possibly losing a fight that we can't get the fights that we want to see because these guys don't want to risk losing. And the thing is, fans don't give a shit about your win-loss record. They don't, but these fighters really care about that, and I attribute that to Floyd Money Mayweather. And again, it's not Floyd's fault. It's not Floyd's fault that he was as brilliant as he was and retired with a perfect record. But specifically with the welterweight and the middleweight divisions in boxing, we are not getting the fights that we want to see because these guys don't want to risk getting into a fight with someone whom they could lose to. This is why we haven't seen Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. yet, because neither one of these guys want to commit to getting into the ring for the biggest fight of the decade, the fight that everybody wants to see, because there's a possibility that can lose, that they can respectively lose, and they don't want to take that chance. And the fighters don't do themselves any favors because they can hide behind promoters. See, promoters take all of the blame for this, right? It's easy for the media and fans to blame Bob Arum and Al Heyman as promoters for making it so that these fights aren't happening, when I firmly believe that if these fighters really put their foot down, they're the talent. If they were to put their foot down and say, I don't give a damn about any of that stuff, let's sit down and make the fight happen. A side this, B side that, who cares? Let's just make the fight happen. Because even if you determine that I'm the B side, if I win this fight, then I am the A side by result because I just won the fight. So who cares going in whether I'm B side versus A side? But all of these ridiculous sort of considerations that are being made with respect to these possible fights are what's holding everything back. And these guys just don't want to take the risk of a blemished record. And it's sad. That's why boxing has floundered in, after the 2000s and moving into the present day. Boxing has been marginalized because we consistently as fans, and the sport overall, in terms of generating revenue, doesn't consistently enough give fans the fight that they want to see. Gervonta Tank Davis will never fight Devin Haney because neither one of them wants to lose. And maybe they will fight each other 5 years after the fact, after perhaps one of them is lost. But by that time, no one cares. The sizzle is over with. You need to get into the ring now. You know what I'm saying? But boxing just has a real big problem with this. And the problem with it is that the problem persists within the divisions and weight classes that sees the most talented and the most box office of the fighters in the sport overall. See, the reason why boxing flourished in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s is because the big draws were the heavyweights, and the heavyweights had no compunctions about fighting each other. You can go all the way back to Ali Frazier, Ali and George Foreman and Ken Norton, Lennox Lewis versus Hasim Rahman twice, Lennox Lewis versus Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis versus Mike Tyson. And I believe Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield also fought twice, if my memory serves me correct. Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe. Even Mike Tyson and Buster Douglas, when Buster Douglas knocked out Mike Tyson, like in the heavyweight division, we got the fights that we wanted to see on a consistent basis. And because back then the heavyweights were the draw, it was a win-win, both for the fans and for the sport. But as the heavyweight division is sort of vanished into the background. Hopefully there's a renaissance with it taking place, although it's taking place very slowly with, Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua and even, Haymaker throwing, I can't even think of his name right now. The guy who lost to Tyson Fury, the one who throws all the haymakers. Forgive me, I can't remember his name right now, but maybe there's a renaissance taking place with boxing, but it's taking slow in terms of the heavyweight division. But the real draw is with the welterweights and the middleweights. And these guys are too afraid to get into the ring because they don't want to risk that win-loss record being blemished. It's caused the sport to become marginalized. And, boxing has created that problem. But again, the promoters are just responding to a climate that has been sort of cultivated by the media, where the media is just incensed on focusing on win-loss records, and they want to attach whether a player is good juxtaposed whether a boxer is good juxtaposed to other boxers based solely on a win-loss record. It's just this weird, pervasive way of looking at boxing, and it's never made much sense. But the people who are involved in boxing, they are responding to it, and they're holding these fights up. So, they're trying to get a fight going with Terrence Crawford and Manny Pacquiao. It's interesting. It's not a mega fight. That is not a mega fight. And Manny Pacquiao is cut from a different cloth. Manny Pacquiao is somebody who doesn't care, who will fight anybody because he doesn't live by these dumbass rules that we live by in America with this boxing stuff. But as interesting as that may be, I wouldn't spend my money on it. I wouldn't spend my money on Manny Pacquiao versus Terrence Crawford. I'd spend my money on Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. But we'll never actually see that fight happen because these promoters just keep getting in the way. Quite frankly, they just want to wait until one of them loses. I guarantee you, if one of those guys loses, if Errol Spence loses because Terrence Crawford is the presumed A side of that fight, if Errol Spence Jr. were to lose a fight, I guarantee you it would be nothing for those guys to sit down at the table and all of a sudden we'll have an Errol Spence Jr. Terrence Crawford fight. But this is the problem. They're so afraid of blemishing that win-loss record that it's causing the sport at large to stall. So until that happens, I am going to go ahead and continue to support the sport through spending money to watch exhibition fights. I paid for Floyd versus Conor McGregor. I was highly entertained. Conor McGregor is not a classically trained boxer, but the sideshow around it, the spectacle around it, which Floyd is excellent at providing, it made it worthy of watching. And I spent my money and I enjoyed every second of it. And, Logan Paul versus Floyd Mayweather Jr., I'll spend money on that as well because, Floyd Mayweather. One thing about it in this day and age with this social media obsessed culture that we live in, when you get somebody like Floyd, who is just the modern day P.T. Barnum in terms of promoting things that he is directly involved in, when you combine that with somebody like Logan Paul or Jake Paul, because they have like a whole bunch of Instagram followers, like 10 million plus each, and the world basically today runs on stupid social media. When you combine those two things, you have the makings of what can what attributes to not necessarily a mega fight, but a mega sporting event at the very least. And mega sporting events and specifically with respect to boxing, I'm going to be interested in that, and I'm going to spend my money on it. So for a lot of you boxing purists that have a problem with this, I suggest that you appeal to the media to stop making everything about the win-loss record, just like NBA fans need to appeal to the media to stop making everything about ring chasing and counting rings. Then maybe we'll get some balance in terms of some of the stuff that people by and large complain about when it comes to these respective sports. NBA players won't be so apt to create super teams if they didn't feel as though their entire legacy hinges on them winning 4 and 5 championships, which isn't exactly the easiest thing in the world to do. And, if some of these promoters felt as though the cachet of their fighters won't be severely impacted by a loss on their record, maybe they will be more likely to sit down at the table and make some of these fights happen. But until we change some of these cultural things that are going on in boxing, exhibitionism is going to continue to be something that draws most eyes to the sport. So, if you have a serious problem or an issue with that, then you need to take a look at the culture of boxing and some of its priorities and the way that it's gone about making certain decisions with respect to fights based upon, storylines and media narratives, because that's really what's holding everything up. So, y'all promoters need to get out of the way, man. For real, like y'all need to get out of the way. Al Heyman and Bob Arum, Oscar De La Hoya with Golden Boy Productions, and even you, Floyd, because you have several fighters that are now under your production hat, Javante Tank Davis being one of them. Y'all need to get out of the way. Stop worrying about A side or B side. Stop worrying about who gets the bigger purse and think about the bigger picture. Because if you really have the superior fighter, they'll win the fight, and by extension of winning the fight, now they are the A side, and they'll receive the biggest piece of the purse when it comes to any particular fight. So all you guys are doing is really killing the sport in the process with all of these political maneuverings. You're killing the sport, and you're killing fans' interest in the sport. So y'all need to get the hell out of the way and make these fights happen. And if you make these fights happen, exhibitionism won't be such a huge part of the reason why people even pay attention to boxing in the first place. And a lot of y'all fighters, you get to conveniently hide behind your promoters. But y'all are grown men. You guys are grown men. And if you really want the fight to happen, go to the promoters and put your foot on their neck and just apply the pressure. Tell them, I want the fight. Do what you got to do. Call them up every day if you have to. You guys are already training as it is, even when you don't have a fight on the books. Keep the pressure on the promoters to make sure that these fights happen. Don't give us Manny Pacquiao versus Terrence Crawford when we want Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. We'll watch it casually. It's not going to make any money. And then I'll turn on First Take on one of these shows the next day, and people will be complaining about why there is waning interest in the sport of boxing after that fight. It's because that wasn't the fight that the people wanted to see. So y'all need to stop playing. Y'all need to stop playing and sit down and make these fights happen. Otherwise, exhibitionism is going to continue to reign supreme. So I personally don't have a problem with exhibitionism. I'm somewhat of a boxing purist just because I grew up watching boxing at a time when it was more pure. But also I grew up watching boxing at a time when we got the fights that we wanted to see when we wanted to see them. Roy Jones Jr. versus Antonio Tarver happened when both of them were in their respective primes as light heavyweights. We didn't get those fights 5 years. We didn't get that fight 5 years after it was supposed to happen, when Roy started getting knocked out on a regular basis and Antonio Tarver started getting fat. Tarver started getting fat and eventually started to try to become a fighter in the heavyweight division, which was an epic fail. Give us the fights we want to see when we want to see them, and you'll see the interest in your sport return to its glory days. So shouts out to Logan Paul, and shouts out to Jake Paul too, man, because you guys are clowns, but clowns are a part of a circus, and clowns are what makes a circus as entertaining as it is. Them boys they scrapped. They scrapped at Hard Rock Stadium a couple days ago in my hometown of Miami, Florida, and it was fun to watch. You know, it was #1 trending topic on Twitter and all of that good stuff. And those are the types of things that are going to fuel this fight being the mega sporting event that it will be once it takes place on June 6th. So, you know, until everybody in boxing gets their head right, you know, exhibitionism it is. So that'll do it for the commentary in this video. Be sure to follow Conscious Approach on Instagram at ConApproach, ConApproach. You can also follow me on Instagram at JVWins, JVWINS. Check out the website, consciousapproach.com, for the full content library. And you can also follow Conscious Approach on Facebook as well. I'm also on Facebook. At JAVISOGDEN, as well as on Twitter. Search JVWins. You can find me there. If you like the commentary in this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. If you happen to be watching this video on Facebook, hit the like button, hit the share button. Comment wherever you see the video. I always like it when people tell me I'm crazy and full of shit and that I'm wrong. It actually makes me just want to do more videos. So comment wherever you see the video. I do appreciate the support. Conscious Approach, this is another video in the books. Deontay Wilder, that's the fighter. I don't know how I forgot that. Deontay Wilder. Wilder is the fighter who got knocked out by Tyson Fury, who was a part of the whole heavyweight thing. But that was an ugly fight. That was ugly. But never mind. The point is, I remembered his name. Wilder Fury. We don't want to see Wilder Fury 3. Please, no. Would like to see Gennady Golovkin versus Canelo Alvarez for a third time. Just go ahead and, you know, finish that off for the three-peat. That would be not a mega fight because they've already fought twice before and Canelo won both times, but it would still be a big draw and I would spend money on that fight. So hopefully we'll get the three-peat for that one. Canelo Alvarez is actually fighting on this weekend. I'm recording this video on Saturday, May the 8th, I believe is today's date. But yeah, so boxers, promoters, give us the fights we want to see. Otherwise, everybody needs to stop bitching about exhibitionism because it's not going to go nowhere unless we get the fights that we want to see. But until next time, people, I appreciate the support. Another Conscious Approach video in the books, and I'm out.